The stage was brightly lit, cameras rolled a glossy LED screen behind the podium, shimmered with the bold title, West African Unity, A New Dawn. Millions were watching live. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood still, calm, yet something in his eyes deep and stormy hinted that this was not going to be a regular summit speech. President Bola Tinubu sat across from him, his expression unreadable. The moderator's voice broke the silence. Captain Traoré, you have the floor. Trao approached the microphone. Slowly, as if every step carried the weight of 1,000 unheard voices, the room tensed. Viewers leaned forward in living rooms, cafes, hospitals, even border guards paused their patrols to listen. But Traoré did not begin with greetings. He looked directly at Tinubu and said something no one expected. I speak today not as a leader, not as a soldier, but as a brother who could not sleep after witnessing what I saw last night. The room froze. A video began to play, a little girl in Nigeria crying beside her mother's lifeless body, shot in her sleep. Gasps. How did it come to this? Tears welled in his eyes, but he continued. She was only 7. Traoré's voice cracked. A long pause followed. His eyes lowered as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded photograph. I carry her image with me today, not to provoke, but to remind us. He unfolded the paper. This is Fatima. Her story did not make the headlines, but her scream reached me through a video that was never meant to be seen. Behind him, the studio screen dimmed. It cut to black and white footage, a dirt path, a burning hut, a small hand clutching a mother's dress. The moderators had not approved this clip, but Traoré had ensured it played. People in the studio shifted uncomfortably. Tinubu stiffened. She begged a soldier to help her mother. He told her to run. He paused again. She never came back. Gasps rippled through the audience. One journalist quietly wiped her eyes. Traoré turned toward Tinubu, but his voice softened. I am not here to blame, Mr. President. I am here to beg with you as a father, as a brother, as a fellow African. This cannot continue. The room was completely silent. The world was holding its breath. A bead of sweat rolled down Tinubu's temple. Cameras zoomed in. Captain Traoré's gaze did not waver. His voice was calm, but heavy, like thunder, about to strike. Tell me, Bola, do you sleep at night? The question struck like a slap. People in the studio stared. The moderator looked alarmed, but remained silent. When reports say 89 villagers died in Sudo last week, when a market in Zamfara is bombed, when children mistake drones for stars. Do you sleep? Tinubu opened his mouth to speak, but Traoré raised a hand gently. This is not political. This is personal. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. They are not just numbers, Mr. President. They are daughters, sons, farmers, mothers. They are faces, empty shoes, burned school books. Viewers watching at home began to cry in Burkina Faso. A market woman dropped her produce and wept. I have no right to speak for Nigeria, but I have a duty to speak for humanity, because if I stay silent, then I am part of the killing. To the audience did not clap. They could not. They were broken. And this was only the beginning. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood completely still. The photo of little Fatima remained in his hand. She ran barefoot, he said, voice over rocks, broken glass, blood. The studio was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. I do not need intelligence reports to know what is happening in Nigeria, he continued. I have seen the footage. I have seen the children hiding in schools with no food. I have seen mothers begging soldiers for mercy. The camera zoomed in on President Tinubu. His eyes did not blink. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Fatima had no shoes. Traoré repeated softly. She was running to nowhere, hoping anyone would save her. The screen behind him flickered. Images appeared. A burnt classroom, scattered books, a child's doll covered in ash. This is not politics. This is a funeral. Gasps. One panelist turned away, trying not to cry. Mr. President, Traoré said, I am not asking for a statement. I am asking for a soul. You could hear people sobbing quietly in the audience and across Africa. Millions began to feel something stir in their hearts: guilt, grief, and the aching question, how did we allow this to happen? Traoré paused, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a quiet fire behind them. I know what war feels like, he said. I have buried soldiers. I have written letters to their mothers. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with pain. But this war, the one killing babies in Zamfara, students in Kaduna, this is not war. This is collapse. He turned toward nation on your back. It is not your spine that breaks first. It is your heart. The room remained frozen. Journalists did not type. They simply watched. I did not come here to shame. Traoré said, I came because silence is a slow death and Africa is choking on it. He looked down at his hands. A leader's chest must beat loudest in war. It must hold the fear of children, the screams of widows, the prayers of grandmothers. He looked back up. Mr. President, if your heart still beats for them, let the world hear it. Tinubu's lips parted, but he could not speak. A single tear rolled down his cheek. The summit was only halfway through, but the moment had already escaped the room. Clips of Traoré's words began to spread across Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp like wildfire. He spoke for us all. Even a Burkina leader has more heart than ours. Nigeria is crying, and Traoré is the only one listening. Young Nigerians gathered in cafes and community halls, watching replays on cracked televisions, and phones held up by bricks. Mothers wept, some whispered prayers, others simply stared in La Rose. A journalist who had lost her nephew in a recent attack wrote on X, Captain Traoré just said everything we have been too broken to say. Thank you. Meanwhile, in the studio, Traoré returned to the microphone. This is not about Burkina Faso. This is about us as Africans, as neighbors, as brothers. He raised a finger and pointed directly at the camera to the children. Watching this, you deserve peace. To the fathers carrying guilt, you are not alone. To the leaders hiding behind silence, your people are dying louder than your words. A stunned cameraman forgot to cut to commercial. The world was crying, and yet something greater was just beginning. As the summit continued, Traoré turned to a worn envelope tucked in his jacket pocket. He held it up. This was sent to me 3 days ago, he said quietly, by a mother from Yobe. He slowly unfolded the letter. Her name is Miriam. Her son Azim was 14. He loved football. He wanted to become a doctor. School caught in crossfire between gangs and security forces. He began to read. The letter allowed each word trembling. Captain Traoré, I write to you because I know you will listen. I do not want revenge. I just want someone to care. Azim's blood is still on my doorstep. I wash it every morning, but it returns with the rain. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tinubu's eyes were downcast. That rain, Ibrahim Traoré said, is not from the sky. It is from all the tears. Nigeria has cried, and yet no one hears. The camera panned across faces frozen in grief. We cannot lead if we do not first kneel at the feet of the people. We have failed. The world watched in silence. Tinubu finally raised his eyes. There was shame in them. Traoré saw it, but he did not strike. He simply walked closer. Mr. President, he said, I know the pressure, I know the weight, but when power looks away, people disappear. He paused, and Nigeria is disappearing. Gasps. No one had ever spoken such words on a global stage. Every week I hear of kidnappings in Kaduna, orphans in Katsina, explosions in Borneo, but the world scrolls past it, and your government writes statements. Instead of solutions, Tinubu opened his mouth trying to speak, but nothing came. I do not say this to humiliate you, Traoré added gently. I say this because I still believe you can turn back. A still image of Nigerian children sleeping on the floor of an overcrowded IDP camp filled the giant screen behind him. Look at them, just look. This is not fake news. This is not propaganda. This is real. A tear slid down Tinubu's face. What kind of legacy do we leave if children must learn the national anthem under gunfire? The question echoed through the room. Nobody had an answer. Traoré took a deep breath and walked toward the front of the stage. 2 nights ago, he began, I saw a video of a boy in my screen, lit up a skinny child barefoot tapping gently on a broken plastic drum. Smoke rose behind him from a recent blast. His name is Ibrahim. Traoré said, same as mine, but his drum, it was not for music. He was using it to calm the younger children. Hiding in rubble silence, that broken drum made more peace than our governments have in years. The audience stirred. Tinubu looked as if he had stopped breathing. That boy with nothing gave comfort to others. So I ask again, what are we doing with all this power, this status, this responsibility? The camera zoomed in on Traoré. If we cannot protect children like Ibrahim, then we do not deserve the titles we wear. He looked directly into the lens, and I include myself. The humility in his words shattered every remaining wall in the room. It is time for action, not slogans, not speeches, action. A single clap was heard, then another, and then the entire studio rose. Just as the applause began to swell, the live broadcast screen suddenly cut to black. Millions watching across Africa believed their televisions had malfunctioned. In truth, someone inside the control room had panicked. The speech was too raw, too loud. Social media erupted. Why did they cut it? Who is afraid of the truth? We need to hear this. In the studio, Traoré stood, confused as technicians rushed around. One of the producers leaned in and whispered into his ear, We have been ordered to end the stream, too emotional, too political. Traoré did not flinch. Instead, he walked straight to the nearest cameraman, still filming for the in-house archive, If the World Cannot Hear Me Live. He said, "Then they will hear me offline." The cameraman nodded silently. The camera rolled again. And Traoré did something unexpected. He stepped off the stage and walked directly toward President Bola Tinubu's seat. "Mr. President, mate, I speak to you leader to leader." The room held its breath. Tinubu slowly stood. For the first time in hours, he responded, "I am listening." No microphone, no podium, no crowd noise, just two African leaders standing face to face. Traoré did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He placed a hand gently on Tinubu's shoulder. "I know you carry pain," he said softly. "I have seen it in your eyes today." Tinubu blinked. "But our people do not need leaders who carry pain. They need leaders who act through it." The room remained silent. Not a single phone rang, even the journalists. "Stop taking notes." Tinubu's voice was dry. "You do not understand how hard it is." Traoré nodded. "You are right. I do not understand your pain." He turned and pointed to the screen behind them, which now displayed a map of Nigeria dotted in red. Each dot marked a mass killing in the past 3 months. "But I do understand. The people's pain, that is, who I speak for." Tinubu's hand trembled slightly. "Do you truly believe it is not too late?" Traoré's response came without hesitation. "It is only too late when we choose comfort over courage." The camera quietly zoomed in as Tinubu's expression shifted. A tear escaped, and behind him thunderous applause resumed. Traoré returned to his seat without saying a word. Tinubu remained standing. He looked out over the crowd. His lips moved slightly, then stopped. At last he asked for a piece of paper from his breast pocket. He pulled out a black pen. "If I may," he said, "I would like to write something." The moderators, unsure of his intention, nodded silently. Tinubu scribbled something on the paper, folded it, and walked to the same podium where Traoré had stood. "This is not a speech," he said. "This is a promise." Then he read what he had written. "Tonight I will travel to Kaduna. I will meet the mothers. I will walk through the camps. I will not speak as a president. I will listen as a father." Tears now flowed freely from the audience. "And I will not return to Aso Rock until I have answers. Real ones." He looked at Traoré. "Thank you for breaking me open." The studio lit up in a standing ovation, and online across Nigeria and Burkina Faso, a single sentence began to trend: "Africa is healing." The footage was shaky, filmed by a young volunteer using a cheap Android phone, but it shook the entire continent. President Tinubu had arrived in Kaduna. No sirens, no convoy, just a dark SUV, one aide, and a notebook in his hand. He walked into the IDP camp. Slowly, women stared in disbelief. One boy whispered, "Is that really him?" Tinubu did not speak. He sat on a wooden bench, surrounded by tents made of rice, sacks, and sticks. The camp director handed him a list. "These are the names of those killed last month," she said. 47. "We have not buried all of them." He looked at the paper. Then he looked up and asked, "May I meet their mothers?" Words spread like fire in less than 20 minutes. 6 grieving mothers stood before him. One held a photograph of her daughter, her only child. Another clutched a torn school uniform. They did not yell. They simply cried. And Tinubu, once the most powerful man in Nigeria, cried with them that night as he slept on a thin mat. Among them, he wrote, "Captain Traoré did not embarrass me. He reminded me that I still have a soul." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré watched the Kaduna footage in his presidential office. He said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered. He went to his advisor, nodded, "Yes, sir," and he listened. But something else was happening too. Across Africa, children began sending video messages to their president's messages, inspired by Traorés' words. The most viral came from a 9-year-old girl in Kano named Sarda. She stood barefoot on cracked concrete, holding a sign that read, "Stop the killing, let us learn." Her voice was small but clear. "If you see us dying and you stay quiet, maybe. You do not love us." She did not scream, she did not cry, but her innocence pierced more hearts than any adult speech ever could. By nightfall, her video had over 9 million views. Traoré reposted it with a caption, "You are the voice of a new Africa, and I hear you." That night, several African presidents released joint statements, promising to do more, but Traoré did not celebrate yet. He turned to his team. "Words are good," he said, "but I'm preparing to return to Nigeria myself." The room went still to walk. Where Fatima died, Traoré arrived in Zamfara, At dawn, no press, no stage, only silence. A local guide led him to a patch of land near a collapsed hut. This is where she fell. The man said, Fatima. Traoré stood still. He did not speak for over 5 minutes. Birds chirped faintly in the background. A small goat wandered nearby. Then, Traoré did something unexpected. He knelt. Fatima, he whispered. The world did not know you, but I will not let you be forgotten. He reached into his pocket and placed something in the dirt. A single white bead from his own mother's necklace. One she had given him before she died when he became a soldier. This is for you, he said, so that every time someone forgets your name, God will remember your face. The guide began to cry, and just as Traoré stood, a crowd began to gather. Quiet villagers. Mothers, farmers, children, standing at a respectful distance. One woman placed her baby on the ground and whispered, You are the only one who came, the wind. Picked up, and for the first time in that broken village, hope returned as Captain Traoré turned to leave the quiet field in Zamfara. Where Fatima had died, a small girl stepped out from the crowd. She could not have been more than 6 years old. She held a broken pencil in her hand and asked softly, Can I still go to school, sir? Traoré knelt down. Yes. He said gently, You can and you must. The little girl nodded. Then, without warning, she began to sing an old Hausa lullaby her mother used to sing before the attacks. One voice became two became 20. Soon the entire village was singing, their voices rising above the scars and the smoke. No one told them to. It came from the pain, it came from the healing, and in the middle of it, Traoré stood crying not as a president, but as a father who had found his lost child. A drone camera captured the scene by accident, and when the footage reached social media, it spread like wildfire. This is the Africa we fight for. One comment read, This is the Africa we must never lose again. The world was not just watching, the world was finally feeling. 2 weeks later, broadcast studio where it had all begun. This time he was not trembling. He walked in carrying a wooden box, hand-carved by displaced artisans in Boro. As Traoré entered, the two men embraced silently. No words, just truth. Then Tinubu opened the box. Inside was a folded Nigerian flag with Fatima's name stitched in gold. Along the edge, She did not die in vain, Tinubu said softly. Her name will now fly with our nation's flag in every. A joint declaration, $100 million in emergency funds for victims. AN, African Child Safety Pact, to be signed by 14 nations, and a new education fund named after Fatima across Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Senegal, and even in the diaspora. Churches, mosques, and marketplaces erupted in joy. For the first time in a long time, the people believed leadership had begun to feel like love in Africa was changing, not because of guns or threats, but because one man spoke the truth, and another man listened. In a grand hall in Abuja, filled with mothers, orphans, students, farmers, and soldiers, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood. At the microphone, he looked out at the audience. Then he looked into the camera, straight into the heart of Africa. The world watched us bleed, he said, but now let the world watch us rise. A massive screen behind him lit up. It showed Fatima's face, Sada's video, Tinubu in Kaduna. The girls singing in Zamfara. The crowd rose to their feet. People were crying. Entire communities held hands in front of their televisions. We are not powerless. Traoré said, We are not voiceless. We are the storm that will protect every child with our peace, not with our weapons. He raised his hand, and for the first time, Africa saw its leaders, not as kings, but as servants of the people. The broadcast ended, but the movement had only just begun. If you felt this story in your soul, do not scroll. Leave a comment for Fatima. Say her name. Tell the world what you wish every leader would hear. Like this video if you believe Africa deserves peace. Subscribe if you believe in leaders like